Well, I'm going to get us started. So I'd like to welcome everyone to the Michigan State University Extension Field Crops Virtual Breakfast. I'm Sarah Franzak. Just a few things before we get started today. If I can advance my slides. There we go. I'd like you to please mute yourself during the presentations and sign in with your first and last name. So you click on the participant list, find your name and hover, click more, then rename, and ask questions in the chat box found at the bottom of the screen, and we'll answer those questions later. And then finally, RUP and CCA codes will be given at 7:30. Michigan State University extension programs are all open to all, and the collection of demographic data from program participants is an important and mandated aspect of the MSU extension programming. This is voluntary information that you provide will not be used in any way to identify you personally, but rather as a member of a group that participated in this program. A link has been shared in the chat, or use the QR code below. We ask that you take a moment to fill out this information. So if you haven't used one of these before, you just get out your phone and turn on your camera, and you can scan that QR code and it'll take you right to the website. This morning, our speaker is going to be Dr. Younsuk Dong and Lyndon Kelly, and their topic will be better irrigation management through monitoring and scheduling. And I believe you guys are going to take it away. So
good. My name's Lyndon Kelly, and as Younsuk gets the slides up there, my job today is to set a little groundwork for Dr. Dong's, Younsuk Dong, Dr. Dong's discussion about monitoring, soil moisture monitoring. And we're going to cover a little bit about irrigation scheduling. We realize that not all of you have irrigation. Some of you may be thinking about adding irrigation. It's probably a little late for making that investment this year. Dealers I visited with yesterday are just now getting the pivots that they ordered in March in this next week. So we're pretty hard to get anything up in July, ordering it now. But for those of you who do have irrigation, we want to make good use of it. Next slide, please. So if we take a look at this last winter, we sort of set ourselves up for a dry year. Starting in September, in October in some areas, but in September through March, we had low rainfall across most of Michigan and Indiana. I work a split job between Michigan State University and Purdue. But if you look at those darker red circles, those are nearing 7 inches of deficit. So about 40% less than normal deficit during a time of the year that we do our recharge, that we really think about things being wet. And people will talk about, well, is this climate change? Well, I'm not sure if it's climate change or not, but I know producers are responding. If we look at Michigan, we have 670,000 irrigated acres. About 10% of those acres, a little more than 10% of those acres have came in the last 8 years. We've been increasing from 2012 through 2017. We increased 11.6, almost 12% increase. And we've been at a steady increase of 2.7 or a little over 2.5 in the last 30 years. So we keep seeing increases in irrigation, and it's all about managing risk. Producers, if they have a natural resource water supply available, and they have land base in the large enough scale that they can make good use of center pivot irrigation, for the most part, we've seen that expansion. But this dry year has quite a bit to do with where we're going as far as the need for irrigation. Next slide. So that dry winter, fall and winter drought that we had, Jeff Andreessen is going to talk a few minutes about how that's continuing in many areas in Michigan into the summer. But the effects of that 6 months of dry happened to cause something that was really abnormal, a lowering of groundwater levels and stream flows during the winter. In the time of the year we normally increase levels, we decreased. So the worst case scenario is some studies down in the industrial park near Elkhart, Indiana, drains a good share of lower Michigan out of Cass County. And that stream actually fell during the fall and winter months when it would normally be in the green line going up. So we're in a new situation. To add to this, we're following 4 very high years that have been peaks. So your neighbors are used to seeing a lot of water in the marshes and the streams and the drainage ditch, and now all of a sudden we've had this tremendous decrease. That's important for irrigators to think about documenting where your surface water level is or where your groundwater level is before you start pumping. So if we do have conflicts with neighbors later on this year, we can tell them, hey, this is where we were at. We started much lower than we have in the last 4 years. The other thing we need to do is to make sure that we can justify our irrigation use. Irrigation has a lot of benefits for the producer and the community and the natural resources around us. It helps us take away those disaster years where we fertilize for 180 bushel corn but only take off 100. Those are hard on our natural resources. This irrigation steadies things. Next slide, please. So we do that through irrigation scheduling. Here's a nice little chart that's printed off of our MSU Irrigation Scheduler. This tool is an Excel spreadsheet. It goes into the Enviro weather pages that Jeff talks about and pulls out the potential ET, the amount of water that crop is going to use, and the evaporation from the soil, ET, evapotranspiration, and that's the water loss from the soil surface and the plant as it grows. The pink line is where the producer theoretically kept his soil moisture. If he overfilled the profile, he'd cause leaching. That's that upper line that's on there. And that's in a couple cases he neared that line. And then the line that we also think about is we don't want our plants to be experiencing drought conditions. And that's when the pink line drops below the brown line towards the bottom. So this irrigation management's a matter of putting on irrigation water to supplement the rainfall in a time that keeps it consistently between those points of drought condition and overfilling the profile. Next slide, please. So one of the really simple tools that I make use of and that's available to everyone is at the Enviro weather pages, and these are there's a newer set coming on, and there's an older set. I'm showing you some of the original environment weather pages. They have a map. You hit one of those golden colored dots, and that's the weather station. Hopefully one close to you, and you can go to the bottom of that page, and there's something called potential ET. That's the amount of predicted and past evaporation and water use by the plant. And it pulls up there in that column second to the right, and it is tells you if you had 6-inch grass, that's our reference crop, how much water would that grass have used on each of those days. And we totaled them up there, and we have 8,200, so a little less than an inch of water in the last 7 days. And if you think about it, we've all had cooler weather than we've had experienced earlier. And Jeff's going to talk about that number maybe doubling here in the next week. One of the quick ways I do this, rather than getting on my computer, I've used their text service, and this is something you can sign up for. It's right there on the page, and you go into their website and sign up, put in your text phone number for having text going to you, and it will call you. Mine come in at 5:35 each morning, and I look at 4 weather stations, sort of a representation around me, and it tells me how much water that reference crop would have used at each of those stations and the forecast the next 5 days. So those numbers are part of what we use. But that's for 6-inch grass. Next slide. So what we need to do is take what we call a crop coefficient. That's usually represented by K sub C. That crop coefficient is the percentage of water your crop at that stage would have used compared to a 6-inch grass. So in our example here, we're using their chart, and if we had V8 corn a week from now or so, we'd be at 56%. Actually, I slid down. I think we were using V6 for our example, 39% of grass. So we're actually using less water than grass would. So we take that evapotranspiration number times that K sub C, and we get our actual crop use. So the last 7 days, our actual crop use would have been at about 32 hundredths, or about a third of an inch for the whole week. So it was pretty low, but that will double next week because a higher amount of water used by the grass plant as we get warmer and drier. And then it will go up as our crop matures and goes into higher amounts of stages that use higher amounts of water. It will go up to the point where when we get to silking, we'll be using 120% of grass. And so we think about those first 2 weeks of July being sort of the peak in most of Michigan for crop water use. And at that point, we're up there where we may be using 1.7, 1.8 inches of water per week. If you have wheat or hay that you're irrigating, they're going to use 100% of the reference crop. So this week we could have got by with 82 hundredths, and next week about 1.6. And we see a lot of the wheat that's in specialty crop contracts being watered right now in our area because of that. Next slide. Some of you are going to say, wow, that was just too much for me. And we see that it's important for producers to be able to justify their irrigation water use. So we came out with a simple piece of paper. We call it the dashboard of the pickup type educational piece. It takes corn and soybeans, and I'm showing you the corn sheet, and gives you a reference number right off of a table. If the high temperature for a given day is 75 degrees and we have corn at 3 leaf, it's going to need 4 hundredths a day. Okay, so there's a quick reference chart. And then if you're using that text ET information, just below that is the crop water use efficiency curves that we've seen from that. Now, some of you are going to say, well, that's a really basic system. It would give me a rough idea how much water I need, but it's really what's in the soil. And I'm going to tell you, especially early in the season like now, when most of our water use is being used to germinate a crop, you know, somebody putting on 4/10 or a half an inch to germinate a crop, or to water in a herbicide and activate it, or to water in fertilizer, nitrogen fertilizer, to keep it from volatilizing. But in a couple weeks, we're going to be asking ourselves, how do I know how much moisture is actually left in the soil? We haven't had those recharge rains that bring the full profile back to full amount of water. So how do we go through that? So next we've got Younsuk Dong. He's a new professor at Michigan State University, and he's now our irrigation specialist, and he's going to talk about some work he's doing on soil moisture monitoring.
All right, well, thank you, Lyndon. So another method to monitor and improve irrigation water management is using soil moisture sensors. The soil moisture sensor has been used to understand the water flow in soil and improve irrigation water use efficiency. The soil moisture sensor can estimate or measure the amount of moisture in soil. And by knowing the amount of moisture in soil, it can help us to determine how much to irrigate and when to irrigate. And within the growing season, the observation of soil moisture can be very useful in monitoring the crop water usage. Well, this slide shows some example of the types and shape of the soil moisture sensors that are commercially available. And the right photo in this slide shows an example of installed soil moisture sensor in one of the demonstration sites. So I'd like to share some of the benefit of using the soil moisture sensors. The first benefit is it can help to determine when to irrigate it. Well, here's just an example. Well, this graph shows the soil moisture sensor data. As you see, the moisture level decreased over time because of the crop is using the water and evapotranspiration. Based on the field capacity and wilting point of the soil, we can set the range of irrigation trigger point. In the upper right corner, there's a table that shows the general numbers of field capacity, wilting point, and available water for each soil type. But these values may vary depending on site-specific condition. Well, typically, irrigation is recommended at 30 to 60% depletion of available water in soil, depending largely on the crop's tolerance to the drought stress, the crop stage of development, and the capacity of irrigation systems. Well, in this example, the irrigation trigger point was set to 14.5% for the sandy loam soil. So when the soil moisture level was approaching to the irrigation trigger level, the irrigation was applied. The other benefit of using the soil moisture sensor is it can help to determine how much to irrigate. So this is just one calculation example for determine how much to irrigate. In this example, the moisture sensors are installed at 6, 18, and 30-inch depth in this cornfield, and we assume that soil type in this field is loamy sand. Using the value from the soil moisture sensor, we can calculate the current of plant available water in this root zone, which is multiplying the sensor values by each soil represented zone. Well, in this example, the current available water for the crop in this root zone is 3.24 inch. And we can calculate the maximum water holding capacity in this root zone, which is multiplying the field capacity by the soil depth. In this example, we use the 12% for field capacity value for this loamy sand. So the maximum water holding capacity in this root zone is 4.32 inch. So the difference between the maximum water holding capacity and the calculated current available water in this root zone is the amount of irrigation that could be applied. So therefore, approximately 1.1 inch of water could be applied to this field, assuming there is no rain in the forecast. Typically, we recommend 80% of this amount for irrigation because we would like to have some room or capacity for the potential rainfall. So about a little over 1/10 inch of irrigation is recommended to this field. The one other benefit of using the soil moisture sensor is that it can help to detect over-irrigation. We recommend installing a soil moisture sensor right below the root zone because it can help us to understand if the water moved below the root zone. Well, this graph shows the soil moisture sensor data from 6, 18, and 36-inch depth, and this example was from the cornfield. Well, as you see in this example, the green line reached the 3-foot depth soil moisture level spiked after an irrigation, which means that water has moved below the 3-foot depth. I'd like to briefly talk about the consideration when installing the soil moisture sensors because the soil moisture sensor measures only a small volume of soil surrounding the sensor, so the installation should be performed carefully. Well, first, there must be a good contact between the sensor and soil to avoid creating an air gap. So try install the sensor firmly and minimize wiggling the sensor when you install. So, and the depth of sensor should be considered based on the crop's root depth. We also recommend to install a sensor at shallow soil depth because this can help, this can be beneficial to monitor the crops at early growth stage. Well, lastly, I'd like to mention that now a lot of companies allow users to see the sensor data in real time through their cloud website with some subscription cost. But the benefit of having and using the real-time data monitoring are that it allows users to see and download the data remotely using their computer with the internet connection. Well, this slide shows the low-cost sensor monitoring system that we MSU irrigation teams have developed and working on. The left photo is the hardware. The right photo is the example of the website. Well, I'd like to mention that we have extension bulletin that has more detailed information on how to improve irrigation water use efficiency using soil moisture sensors. We also have another extension bulletin that describes how to efficiently manage the centipede irrigation system. These bulletins can be downloaded through our website, so please check our website. Well, with that, thank you so much for listening to our presentation this morning. If you have any questions regarding irrigation and sensor technology, please feel free to contact us. We'll be happy to talk with you. Thank you.
We have a couple of questions in the chat box. So the first one is, where can you find the soil moisture sensors and what is the cost? So,
yeah, I think the easiest way to find the sensor is online. The companies are the Irometer, the Meter Group Davis, Spectrum Technology, Centec, and Campbell Scientific. I'm sure there are a couple other companies are making. The cost of soil moisture sensor varies from like $30 to a couple $100. But to use the sensor, you need some type of handheld reading tool or data logger, which cost varies from a couple $100 to $1,000. The one thing to mention that we are working on developing a low-cost irrigation management package, including the hardware software. So we hope to share it with you soon. So, yeah.
Paul asked or stated, Consumers Energy is charging residential customers 1.5 times more for energy delivered Monday through Friday between 2 p.m. and 7 p.m. from June 1st to September 30th. Is this impacting farm customers as well? And if it is, are folks planning on shifting their irrigation times to avoid higher cost period? So I think I read this story in the Detroit News, and I think it's just residential customers. So if I'm wrong here, but if you have like a commercial account, it wouldn't affect you. Is that what you understand?
Yes,
Lyndon?
yes, Sarah, that's what we understand. Although I'd wait to see if your first bill comes out that way, but we have producers that will have 30 or 40 power bills, and in the middle of July, those power bills may be in the $8,000 to $10,000 range. So they're gonna scream loudly if it's 60% more for the hours. And most of us don't build irrigation equipment to run just the night hours. And there's some problems with irrigating at night, an increase in disease and some of those things. But for most irrigation systems, we got to run it day and night to be able to keep up with the amount of removal we have. There are companies in Michigan that have incentive programs that reduce your power cost if you use it at night during their off-peak hours. And so we have some people in the southwest corner of the state that pay half the rate from, I believe it's 8 p.m. until 7 a.m. And they will actually set things up so that they do most of their irrigation. What they can flex, they'll do during those low peak hours. So there are a number of things out there. If you're using electricity, contact your power company to your commercial account and ask them if there are any other incentive programs that are out there to help you offset some of your costs.
And I'd add, if you contact Charles Gould, who's an educator with us, he can help you with other types of energy efficiencies on your farm, which might offset this. So there's that too. So another question is, how many soil moisture sensors are recommended for a farm given area?
I think this is an excellent question. Depending on the topography and variability of the soil type within the field, but this year we will be installing 15 sensor monitoring units in, I believe, 40-acre size irrigated field to find this to answer this question. So hopefully, maybe this winter we'll have to share some of the findings.
I guess we'll be looking forward to that. Thanks for that question. Yeah. George asked Jeff, how bad is the Oregon, California water situation?
And I'm just busy typing a response here, but I'll just say it's bad. And what is not just California, but much of the West, but California is probably in the heart of this, is basically referred to now as a mega drought. And a mega drought is something we fortunately don't see here, or haven't for a long, long time in the Midwest, but conditions are very, 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 very poor at best. And agriculturally, growers know that they will not have the water that's needed. There are a lot of difficult decisions that have to be made with regard to planting, and many crops will not be planted because now, of course, and I was just typing here, that part of the country is in the middle of its dry season. So there's little or no rain coming to help out here, nothing till fall. So they're in a very, very difficult situation. And the drought monitor, which we took note when we got a D2, well, they have D4s. And they've had D4s, which is exceptional. That's up in the top couple percent in terms of impact and condition, and they've been in D4 for some time. So it's a very, very difficult situation out there.
Well, Eric asks, what is the cost for a new center pivot system for an 80-acre field, and how long would it take to recoup those costs, including maintenance and power costs for a typical corn and soybean rotation?
So Eric, that's we spend a lot of time talking about that. An 80-acre field is a little bit of an expense in that you're either going to tow a 40-acre machine twice, or you're going to use a 160-acre machine and do a half circle. Most of the producers out there are doing the 160-acre machine and the half circle right now. And you're going to be in, when the last couple I've seen come across my desk, we're in the 120,000 range. So you do the math, you don't get a whole 80 acres irrigated. You get somewhere around 72 acres irrigated. So you do the math, and we're, shy of $2,000 per acre invested. I got to say, I'm almost scared to talk about that kind of thing right now, because those decisions made during a drought time period are often regretted. And I've been through the 88 was when I started. The 88 drought was my first year in extension. And we've had 3, and then 2012 was a major one. We have major expansions in irrigation after droughts, but the people that are happiest learn from the drought and then make the investment over the fall and winter. The lowest prices on center pivot irrigation are in August and September. Easily a 20% difference between then and the peak price, which is right now. Your power companies, we just talked about power companies, they like to have 6 months to do an installation. So do your homework. There's several people in the state that do farm economics and are prepared and have experience in looking at irrigation investments, and make sure it really matches your lifestyle and your farm plan.
Thanks, Lyndon. Next question is, with the dry weather and many producers starting to apply side dress nitrogen, should we be making any adjustments to the rates applied?
Well, it's a split world. If you're dry and you're not irrigated, start looking at what your potential yield goal will be and start reducing. If you've been on the market for nitrogen, it is terribly expensive this year, and you start reducing the amount that's there. And one good way to look at this is let's maybe do 2 applications. Let's do a side dress now, and then hold back on that last 30 or 40 pounds and apply that by high boy or by air. 4th of July, if you're blessed and miracles happen and we get absolute lots of rain and refill the profile, then go ahead and add that last amount of nitrogen. If you're an irrigator and you're up for it and you know what's going on, that $5+ range for corn puts us up towards the maximum amount of nitrogen. You're going to be at the higher point of the curve. And most of those people are going to use a split system anyway. They're going to use about 3/4 of their nitrogen this next 2 weeks, and then follow up with the last quarter either through the pivot or by air or high boy. So it's a good plan one way or the other, but for irrigators, this is a good time to make some money and not short yourself on either water or nitrogen.
Clyde asks a question about comparing subsurface to above ground irrigation systems, I'm assuming.
Yeah, so I think he's referring to subsurface drip, and Clyde, make sure, give me a call. I'd be glad to talk about it. There are a few places in the state of Michigan that subsurface drip will work well. Subsurface drip was developed. Kansas is the big leader where we're irrigating clay soils. We need a impermeable or fairly impermeable layer about 3 foot down to hold the water up. So that has that only exists in a few places. If you're farming and you know what I'm talking about, these are the fields that you could stop your drainage tile and add subsurface irrigation during the summer and make that work. Unfortunately, in most scenarios, the subsurface drip irrigation is more expensive than center pivot irrigation and lacks the ability to do a lot of watering up or watering in, which has in recent years, because of the sporadic rain, we've been getting a lot of benefit out of those half-inch applications to get a crop going and going well, and to incorporate either herbicides or nitrogen and make sure we're not losing those resources.
All right. Thanks for those answers, Lyndon. I don't see any more questions in the chat box. So I think we're going to call it good. Unless you guys have one last parting comment, I think we can say goodbye this morning. Well, thanks everybody for coming, and I hope you have a nice weekend.